don't care if it's Christmas Eve. Someone like you has no business in first class. Move to the back or get off my plane." The words hit the cabin like a thunderclap on Christmas Eve. Captain Derek Hamilton's voice carried the authority of 23 years in the cockpit and the arrogance of a man who'd never been challenged. His finger pointed toward the economy section like a judge delivering a verdict. The woman in seat 2A didn't flinch. Jasmine Brooks, 42 years old, looked up from her tablet with the kind of calm that comes before a storm. She was wearing a gray hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. To everyone watching, she looked like someone who'd stumbled into the wrong section. But Captain Hamilton had no idea he just declared war on the owner of Aurora Airlines. Captain Hamilton, Jasmine said, her voice steady as steel, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career. Before we dive into what happens next, I want to ask you something. Drop a Christmas tree emoji in the comments if you've ever been judged by how you look or what you're wearing. This Christmas Eve story is about to show you what happens when assumptions collide with reality, and trust me, you won't see this ending coming. If this story shocks you even a little bit, smash that subscribe button, because what unfolds over the next hour will blow your mind. We're about to witness discrimination justice and the kind of Christmas miracle that happens when the underdog turns out to own the entire game. This is Flight 447 from JFK to London Heathrow. It's 8:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve 2024. The cabin is full of passengers heading home for the holidays, but none of them know they're about to witness one of the most epic takedowns in aviation history. The man pointing his finger at Jasmine thinks he's removing a problem passenger. What he's actually doing is ending his career, destroying his reputation, and learning the hardest lesson of his life. Because sometimes the person you're trying to push down is the one who signs your paycheck. Let me paint you the full picture of how we got here, because this story isn't just about a seat on a plane. It's about power prejudice and what happens when someone finally has enough. To understand what happened on Flight 447, you have to go back 29 years to a Greyhound bus station in Birmingham, Alabama. December 24th, 1995. 12-year-old Jasmine Brooks sat next to her grandmother, Rosa Brooks, on a bus heading north for Christmas. Rosa had worked 3 jobs to save enough money for this trip to visit family in Detroit. She'd bought 2 tickets fair and square, and they were sitting in their assigned seats near the front. The bus was crowded, filled with Christmas travelers. When a white businessman in an expensive coat got on at the last stop, he looked around the packed bus and his eyes landed on Rosa and Jasmine. He walked up to the driver and whispered something. The driver, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth, walked back to their row. "Ma'am, we're going to need you and the girl to move to the back. We've got a passenger comfort situation." Rosa looked up, confused. "Excuse me, we have tickets for these seats." "Company policy," the driver said. "Sometimes we need to accommodate special passengers. Y'all need to move." Rosa knew what this was. Even in 1995, even with civil rights laws, some things hadn't changed as much as people wanted to believe. But she was tired, her granddaughter was excited about Christmas, and she didn't want to make a scene. As they gathered their bags and walked to the back of the bus past the smirking businessman who slid into Rosa's warm seat, 12-year-old Jasmine made a promise that would shape the rest of her life. "Grandma," she whispered one day, "I'll own the bus. I'll own the plane. I'll own everything, and no one will ever move us again." Rosa squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "Baby girl, you dream as big as you want. But remember, when you get that power, you use it to protect people, not hurt them." Jasmine never forgot that Christmas Eve. Not when she was 16 and living in her car after Rosa died. Not when she was 22 and working 3 jobs while studying computer science at night. Not when she started her first tech company in a garage, or when she sold it for $50 million, or when she built her second company and sold it for $500 million. By 40, Jasmine Brooks was worth $8 billion. She owned tech companies, real estate empires, and investment funds. But she remembered every slight, every assumption, every time someone looked at her, and decided she didn't belong. 6 months ago, she'd quietly acquired Aurora Airlines. The company was struggling, hemorrhaging money, and rumored to have serious culture problems. Jasmine didn't buy it for the profit potential. She bought it because she'd received dozens of complaints about discrimination on Aurora flights. Complaints that mysteriously disappeared into corporate bureaucracy. The board thought they were selling to a consortium of investors. They had no idea their new owner was a black woman who planned to root out every trace of bias in their company. Jasmine had spent months going undercover taking Aurora flights, dressed casually, testing how crew members treated passengers who didn't fit their expectations. Flight 447 was supposed to be her final test. She'd specifically booked the Christmas Eve red-eye because holiday flights were stressful, and stress revealed people's true character. She wanted to see how Aurora's flagship crew treated a black woman in first class when they thought nobody important was watching. She got her answer faster than expected. The hoodie was intentional. The jeans were strategic. The lack of jewelry, the worn sneakers, the tired expression from actually working 16-hour days, running her companies. It all painted a picture that apparently didn't match Captain Hamilton's idea of who belonged in Seat 2A. What Hamilton didn't know was that Seat 2A was technically Jasmine's seat. Not just because she'd paid for it, but because she owned it. She owned every seat on the plane, every meal in the galley, every uniform in the crew lockers, and every stripe on Hamilton's shoulders. Jasmine had given Hamilton and his crew multiple chances to treat her with basic dignity. She'd shown her boarding pass, answered his questions politely, and even offered to show additional identification. But Hamilton's bias was stronger than his professionalism. Now, as she sat in the seat she legally owned while the captain of her own airline demanded she move to the back, Jasmine felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Rose's memory about every passenger who'd been treated like this before, and about making sure it never happened again. The little girl who'd been forced to the back of the bus was gone. In her place sat a billionaire with the power to change everything, and Captain Hamilton was about to learn that some passengers don't just fight back. Some passengers own the whole damn airline. Captain Derek Hamilton believed he was Aurora Airlines' most valuable asset, and for 23 years the company had done nothing to contradict that belief. At 48, Hamilton was everything Aurora's marketing department loved: silver-haired, square-jawed, and confident enough to look good in a uniform. He'd been the face of their Experience Excellence campaign for 5 years, appearing on billboards and commercials as the embodiment of professional aviation. Hamilton flew Aurora's most prestigious routes. He commanded their newest aircraft. He was invited to company events quoted in industry magazines and trusted with VIP passengers who specifically requested him as their captain. Management treated him like royalty because passengers loved the image of having a real pilot's pilot in the cockpit. But Hamilton's excellence had a dark side that Aurora's old leadership had chosen to ignore. The complaints started small. A passenger felt uncomfortable with how Hamilton had questioned their presence in first class. A flight attendant mentioned that the captain seemed to have different safety protocols depending on who was flying. Gate agents reported that Hamilton sometimes made comments about passengers who didn't look like his idea of Aurora's typical clientele. Each complaint was filed, investigated by supervisors who golfed with Hamilton on weekends and quietly dismissed as misunderstandings or personality conflicts. Hamilton was too valuable to lose over what management called communication style differences. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Hamilton had an uncanny ability to find regulation violations when certain passengers were involved. He'd suddenly discover weight distribution issues that required passenger relocations. He'd identify security concerns that demanded additional screening for travelers who didn't meet his unspoken standards. Hamilton never used overtly racial language. He was too smart for that. Instead, he talked about maintaining standards, preserving the Aurora experience, and ensuring passenger comfort. He'd built a vocabulary of coded discrimination that sounded professional, but achieved the same result people he didn't think belonged were made to feel unwelcome. Working Christmas Eve had put Hamilton in a particularly foul mood. He'd been forced to take the holiday flight when a junior captain called in sick, and he blamed Aurora's declining standards for being stuck working while his family celebrated without him. In Hamilton's mind, the airline was going downhill because management cared more about political correctness than maintaining quality. When he'd walked through the first-class cabin for his pre-flight inspection, Hamilton's eyes had immediately locked onto seat 2A. The woman sitting there violated every assumption he had about who deserved premium service. She was black-dressed casually and looked tired rather than pampered. Hamilton's brain had immediately started creating justifications. She must be using stolen miles. She must have gotten an upgrade through some computer error. She must be one of those people who complained loudly until gate agents gave in just to avoid problems. The idea that she might actually belong there, that she might have paid the full $20,000 fare for a Christmas Eve first-class ticket, never seriously crossed Hamilton's mind. In his world, people who looked like her simply didn't have that kind of money. Hamilton had built his entire identity around being Aurora's standard-bearer. He genuinely believed he was protecting the airline's reputation by maintaining what he called appropriate passenger demographics. He saw himself as a guardian of excellence, not a practitioner of prejudice. The irony was that Hamilton actually was an excellent pilot. His technical skills were flawless, his safety record perfect, and his ability to handle emergency situations legendary among his peers. But his personal biases had poisoned everything else about his professional behavior. Hamilton had never faced consequences for his discrimination because Aurora's previous ownership valued his marketing appeal more than passenger complaints. The few crew members who'd tried to challenge his behavior had been transferred or quietly encouraged to find opportunities elsewhere. But Aurora had new ownership now, and Hamilton had no idea that the standards he claimed to protect were about to be turned against him. The woman in seat 2A wasn't just someone he could intimidate and dismiss. She was someone with the power to end his career with a single word. As Hamilton prepared to exercise what he thought was his ultimate authority as captain, he was actually about to learn that real power doesn't come from wearing stripes on your shoulders. Real power comes from signing the paychecks of the people who wear those stripes. Captain Derek Hamilton thought he was maintaining Aurora Airlines' standards. What he was actually doing was destroying his own future one discriminatory word at a time. Aurora Airlines Flight 447 was supposed to be the crown jewel of Christmas Eve travel. The Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner sat gleaming under the terminal lights at JFK's Terminal 4, its silver and blue livery reflecting the glow of holiday decorations that adorned the gate area. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was a monument to luxury. 12 private suites arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each featuring a lie-flat bed, personal entertainment system, and enough space for passengers to move around comfortably during the 7-hour flight to London Heathrow. Seat 2A, where Jasmine Brooks had settled in, was considered the premium spot, maximum privacy with easy access to the galley and lavatory. Sophia Martinez had been working as a flight attendant for Aurora for exactly 4 months, and tonight was her first time serving the first-class cabin on her own. At 26, she was still nervous about getting every detail perfect, especially on such a high-profile route. Her supervisor had emphasized that Christmas Eve flights were filled with VIPs who expected flawless service. Sophia had noticed something off about Jasmine's boarding process. The gate agent, Carlos Mendoza, had flagged the booking as a last-minute addition that required manual ticket printing. The passenger manifest showed Jay Brooks with a notation about being added to the flight just 6 hours before departure. That's unusual for first class on Christmas Eve, Carlos had mentioned as he handed Sophia the boarding information. These seats book months in advance. Must be someone really important to get Aurora Corporate to override the system. But when Sophia saw Jasmine walk down the jet bridge in her casual clothes, she felt confused. The passenger didn't look like the tech executives, investment bankers, or celebrities who typically filled first class on the JFK London route. Sophia wondered if there had been some kind of mistake. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Hamilton was reviewing the passenger manifest with his first officer, James Mitchell. James, 35 years old and considered one of Aurora's rising stars, had flown with Hamilton enough times to recognize when the captain was in one of his moods. "Christmas Eve," Red-Eye Hamilton muttered. "Half these passengers probably got upgrades they didn't earn. Look at this boarding list. Half the names I don't recognize, and you know how gate agents cave to pressure during the holidays." James nodded noncommittally. He'd learned that agreeing with Hamilton's complaints was easier than challenging them even when he disagreed. James had heard rumors about Hamilton's reputation with certain passengers, but he'd never witnessed anything directly and preferred to focus on flying rather than crew politics. In the main cabin, passengers were settling in for the overnight flight. Emma Rodriguez, a 19-year-old college student from New York University, was documenting her Christmas journey home to London on her Instagram stories. Her parents had surprised her with a business class ticket, and she was excited to share every moment of her first premium airline experience. Emma had her phone out constantly taking photos of the cabin, her seat, and the other passengers. She'd already posted about the Aurora Lounge, the boarding process, and her excitement about flying on Christmas Eve. Her Instagram followers were engaged and commenting frequently, turning her travel documentation into an interactive experience. 3 rows behind Jasmine Harold Thompson was quietly reading a paperback novel. The 67-year-old military veteran had used his accumulated miles to upgrade from economy, treating himself to first class for the first time in his life. Harold was flying to London to visit his daughter's family for Christmas, and the upgrade felt like a small miracle after years of cramped coach flights. In seat 1F, Victoria Shaw was working on her laptop preparing for business meetings that would begin the day after Christmas. The 52-year-old executive had built her reputation on attention to detail and had already noticed the unusual tension surrounding Jasmine's boarding. Victoria's instincts told her something was developing, and she kept her phone nearby just in case. Preston Blackwood III occupied seat 3A, and he was already annoyed. The 28-year-old had expected to be upgraded to seat 2A, which he considered rightfully his due to his father's senatorial status. Preston had specifically requested the premium seat and was irritated to find it occupied by someone he deemed unworthy of the position. Preston had grown up believing that first-class travel was his birthright, and he'd never encountered a situation where his family name and connections didn't guarantee him the best of everything. Seeing Jasmine in what he considered his seat had sparked a sense of injustice that would soon escalate into something much worse. As the boarding process continued, Sophia found herself making multiple trips past Jasmine's seat. Each time she felt more uncertain about the situation. The passenger seemed perfectly polite and appropriate, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that Captain Hamilton would have opinions about the seating arrangement. Sophia had heard stories about Hamilton's attention to detail and his strong opinions about maintaining Aurora's image. She'd been warned by other flight attendants that the captain sometimes had concerns about passenger placement that he expected crew members to handle discreetly. At 8:30 p.m., 30 minutes before scheduled departure, Sophia noticed Captain Hamilton emerging from the cockpit for his customary pre-flight cabin inspection. She watched as his eyes swept the first-class section, mentally cataloging every detail that might fall short of his standards. When Hamilton's gaze landed on Jasmine, Sophia saw his expression change. The captain's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and she recognized the look of someone who had found exactly what he was looking for, a problem to solve. Sophia felt her stomach tighten. In her 4 months with Aurora, she'd learned to recognize when situations were about to escalate beyond her control, and Captain Hamilton's body language was sending every warning signal she'd been trained to notice. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change multiple lives forever, and none of the passengers had any idea they were about to witness aviation history in the making. Captain Hamilton's polished leather shoes clicked against the cabin floor as he approached seat 2A with the measured stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. The sound cut through the quiet conversations and rustling of passengers settling in, causing several heads to turn toward the unfolding drama. Jasmine sensed his presence before she saw him. She'd learned long ago to recognize when someone was approaching with hostile intent, and Hamilton's energy radiated disapproval from 20 feet away. She looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing the quarterly performance reports of Aurora Airlines, her own company. "Excuse me," Hamilton said, his voice carrying just enough authority to make nearby passengers pause their conversations. "I need to see your boarding pass." Jasmine studied him for a moment. She could see everything she needed to know in his expression, the automatic assumption that she didn't belong, the irritation at having to deal with what he clearly viewed as an irregularity, and the confidence that his authority would resolve the situation quickly. "Is there a problem?" Captain Jasmine asked, her voice calm and professional. "Just routine verification," Hamilton replied, though his tone suggested anything but routine. "We've had some issues with upgraded passengers this evening." Sophia Martinez watched from the galley, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged champagne glasses on a serving tray. She'd been dreading this moment since she first noticed Hamilton's reaction to Jasmine's presence. Sophia had seen this pattern before with other crew members, though never directed at a first-class passenger. Jasmine reached into her small purse and retrieved her boarding pass, extending it toward Hamilton with steady fingers. As he took the thermal paper slip, she noticed Emma Rodriguez quietly lifting her phone in their direction, the teenager's instincts sensing a moment worth capturing. Hamilton examined the boarding pass with theatrical suspicion, holding it up to the cabin lights, as if checking for watermarks on currency. His performance was designed to suggest fraud, while maintaining plausible deniability about his true motivations. "This was issued just 6 hours ago," Hamilton announced loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "That's highly unusual for a premium seat on Christmas Eve. These cabins book months in advance." "I had a last-minute schedule change," Jasmine replied evenly. "My assistant made the arrangements through Aurora's corporate booking system." Hamilton's eyes narrowed. The mention of corporate booking should have given him pause, but his bias was stronger than his caution. In his mind, people who looked like Jasmine didn't have assistants who could pull strings with Aurora's executives. "Corporate booking requires verification." Hamilton continued, his voice growing more authoritative. "We need to confirm your identity and payment method before takeoff." James Mitchell appeared at the cockpit door, drawn by the unusual sound of his captain conducting passenger interviews in the cabin. He could see the situation developing, but felt trapped between his duty to support his captain and his growing discomfort with Hamilton's behavior. Captain Hamilton Jasmine said, reading his name tag with deliberate slowness, "I've provided my boarding pass, which was issued by your own airline. Is there something specific you need that would justify this level of scrutiny?" Hamilton felt challenged by her calm confidence, and his response escalated accordingly. "Ma'am, I'm responsible for the safety and security of this aircraft. I have the authority to verify any passenger's documentation if I have concerns about irregularities." Emma Rodriguez was now openly filming her phone camera, capturing every word and gesture. Her Instagram live stream had attracted 50 viewers who were commenting rapidly about what they were witnessing. The engagement was unlike anything Emma had experienced, and she instinctively knew she was documenting something significant. Harold Thompson looked up from his book, his military background giving him a keen sense of when authority was being abused. He'd seen plenty of officers who used their rank to intimidate subordinates, and Hamilton's behavior triggered every one of his warning systems. Young Lady Harold said quietly to Jasmine, "You don't have to answer any questions beyond what's required by law. This gentleman is creating a disturbance, not you." Hamilton wheeled around to face Harold, his face flushing with anger. "Sir, I'm going to need you to mind your own business. This is a crew matter." Actually, Victoria Shaw interjected from across the aisle, her executive voice cutting through the tension. This appears to be a passenger rights matter. I'm recording this interaction for legal purposes. She held up her phone, its screen clearly showing the recording interface. Victoria had spent decades in corporate environments and recognized discrimination when she saw it. Her business instincts told her this situation was about to become very expensive for Aurora Airlines. Hamilton felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. What should have been a simple passenger relocation was turning into a public spectacle with multiple witnesses documenting his every word. But his pride wouldn't let him back down now. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hamilton announced to the entire first-class cabin, "I appreciate your concern, but I need to resolve this seating issue before we can depart. We have policies and procedures that ensure every passenger is exactly where they're supposed to be." Preston Blackwood III chose this moment to insert himself into the conflict. "Captain, I couldn't help but notice that my usual seat assignment was given to someone else. Perhaps we could resolve both issues simultaneously." Preston's entitlement was so casual and complete that even Hamilton paused. But the young man's intervention provided exactly the justification Hamilton needed to escalate his demands. "Exactly," Hamilton said, seizing on Preston's comment. "We have a VIP passenger who specifically requested seat 2A, and we need to honor our commitment to valued customers." Jasmine looked from Hamilton to Preston, seeing the entire dynamic clearly now. This wasn't just about bias. It was about a power structure that automatically prioritized some passengers over others based on assumptions about worth, background, and influence. "I see," Jasmine said quietly. "So, you're asking me to give up the seat I paid for so that someone you consider more deserving can have it instead?" "I'm asking you to work with us to resolve a scheduling conflict," Hamilton replied, though his words fooled no one who was paying attention. Sophia Martinez finally found her courage. "Captain Hamilton," she said, stepping forward from the galley, "I've reviewed the manifest. Ms. Brooks's reservation is completely valid. She paid the full fare 6 hours ago through proper channels." Hamilton turned on Sophia with fury that had been building throughout the confrontation. "Flight Attendant Martinez, you'll concern yourself with service duties and leave passenger verification to the cockpit crew." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Sophia visibly flinched. She was 26 years old, 4 months into her dream job, and being dressed down by Aurora's most senior captain in front of a cabin full of passengers. But Jasmine had seen enough. "Captain Hamilton," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "you have exactly one chance to stop this behavior and return to the cockpit. What happens next depends entirely on your decision in the next 10 seconds. Hamilton stared at her, seeing something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. For the first time since the confrontation began, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. But his pride was stronger than his intuition, and pride was about to cost him everything. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 had transformed into an impromptu theater with 12 passengers now fully engaged in a drama none of them had expected to witness on Christmas Eve. What had begun as Captain Hamilton's private confrontation with Jasmine Brooks was rapidly becoming a public reckoning with consequences that would extend far beyond the aircraft. Emma Rodriguez's Instagram live stream had grown to over 200 viewers, with comments flooding in faster than she could read them. Her followers were tagging friends, sharing the stream to their own stories, and creating a viral moment that neither Emma nor Aurora Airlines could control. "This is insane," Emma whispered to her camera while keeping it trained on the confrontation. "You guys, this captain is literally trying to kick this woman out of first class for no reason. The comments are going crazy. Should I go to the flight attendants?" The engagement numbers kept climbing. 300 viewers. 400. Emma had never experienced anything like it, and her journalism instincts told her to keep documenting everything. She switched to her Twitter account and posted "Live Aurora Airlines Captain discriminating against black passenger on Christmas Eve flight. This is happening right now." Hashtag Aurora447. Hashtag Christmas Eve. Victoria Shaw had positioned herself to capture the entire scene from multiple angles, her business phone recording while she took notes on her personal device. 25 years in corporate litigation had taught her to document everything when witnessing potential civil rights violations. "Harold," she said quietly to the veteran across the aisle. "Are you getting this?" Harold Thompson nodded, his phone camera steady despite his anger at what he was witnessing. 30 years in the military, and I know discrimination when I see it. This girl's doing nothing wrong. Preston Blackwood III was becoming increasingly agitated as the confrontation continued. In his worldview, problems like this were resolved quickly and quietly, usually in his favor. The fact that the woman in his seat was refusing to move, and that other passengers were supporting her, violated every assumption he had about how these situations worked. "This is ridiculous," Preston announced to anyone listening. "I specifically requested seat 2A. My father is Senator Blackwood, and Aurora has always accommodated our family's preferences." His entitlement was so naked that even passengers who hadn't been paying attention turned to stare. Emma immediately swung her camera toward Preston, recognizing that his words were adding another dimension to an already explosive situation. "Did you hear that?" Emma said to her live stream audience. "Senator's son expects special treatment. You can't make this stuff up. The comments are saying this is going viral on TikTok, too." Sophia Martinez was caught between her training her conscience and her fear of Captain Hamilton's authority. Aurora's employee handbook was clear about supporting passengers against discrimination, but it was equally clear about respecting the chain of command. Sophia had never faced a situation where those two directives were in direct conflict. Another flight attendant, Marcus Rivera, emerged from the aft galley to see what was causing the commotion. Marcus had 15 years of experience with Aurora and immediately recognized the danger signs of a situation spiraling out of control. "Sophia," Marcus said quietly, "have you called the ground supervisor?" Captain Hamilton said he was handling passenger verification. Sophia replied, her voice tight with stress. "I don't want to overstep." Marcus looked at the scene unfolding in the premium cabin and made a decision that would later be credited with preventing the situation from becoming even worse. "I'm calling David Park," Marcus said, referring to Aurora's executive liaison who handled VIP passenger issues. "This is beyond crew authority now." As Marcus moved to the front galley phone, James Mitchell was having his own crisis of conscience in the cockpit doorway. The first officer had remained silent during Hamilton's confrontation, but the involvement of multiple passengers and the obvious recording of the incident was forcing him to consider his own liability. James had heard rumors about Hamilton's behavior with certain passengers, but he'd never witnessed it directly. Now he was watching his captain create what was clearly a public relations disaster for Aurora Airlines, possibly a legal nightmare, and definitely a career-ending mistake. Derek James said quietly, trying to get Hamilton's attention without addressing him by rank in front of the passengers. "We need to talk. In the cockpit. Now." But Hamilton was too invested in the confrontation to back down. His authority had been challenged in front of passengers, crew, and cameras, and his ego demanded vindication regardless of the cost. Harold Thompson stood up from his seat, his 6-foot frame and military bearing commanding immediate attention. "Captain," he said in the voice he'd once used to address subordinates who'd crossed the line, "I've served my country for 30 years, and I know what integrity looks like. What you're doing to this young woman has nothing to do with safety or security, and everything to do with bias." The weight of Harold's words hit the cabin like a physical force. Here was a white military veteran, the kind of passenger Hamilton typically treated with automatic respect, directly challenging the captain's behavior and motives. Victoria Shaw seized the moment to create an official record. "Captain Hamilton," she said in her clear executive voice. "I'm Victoria Shaw, Senior Litigation Counsel for Blackstone Enterprises. I'm formally notifying you that your conduct is being recorded by multiple passengers and appears to constitute discrimination based on race. Aurora Airlines should be aware that this incident is being documented for potential legal action. Emma's live stream audience had grown to over 800 viewers, with the hashtag Aurora447 beginning to trend on Twitter. Comments were pouring in from viewers around the world who were watching a real-time discrimination incident unfold on Christmas Eve. The cabin had become a courtroom. Hamilton was on trial, and the jury of passengers and online viewers was reaching a unanimous verdict. But the defendant didn't realize the true identity of his victim, and the consequences were about to become far more severe than anyone aboard Flight 447 could imagine. Emma Rodriguez's hands trembled with adrenaline as she watched the numbers on her Instagram live stream climb past 1,000 viewers. Comments were flooding in so fast that the text became a blur of outrage, support, and demands for justice. She'd never experienced anything close to this level of engagement, and the responsibility of documenting what was clearly a historic moment felt overwhelming. "You guys, this is unreal," Emma whispered to her camera while keeping Captain Hamilton and Jasmine in frame. "We're at over 1,000 people watching live. Everyone's saying this needs to go viral. I'm seeing comments from people in Australia, the UK, everywhere. Hashtag Aurora447 is trending." On Twitter, Victoria Shaw's legal expertise was creating a parallel documentation thread that was gaining its own momentum. Her tweet thread began 112, currently witnessing discrimination on Aurora Airlines Flight 447. Captain ordering black passenger to leave first-class seat she paid for. Recording everything for legal purposes. This is what bias looks like in real time. Hashtag Aurora447. Hashtag Christmas Eve. Each subsequent tweet detailed another aspect of Hamilton's behavior. Preston's entitlement, and Jasmine's calm professionalism under pressure. Victoria's followers, primarily executives and legal professionals, were retweeting rapidly and adding their own commentary about corporate liability and civil rights violations. Harold Thompson, despite being 67 years old, was surprisingly social media savvy. His Facebook post was being shared across veteran groups and military networks. Watching a disgraceful display of discrimination on Aurora Airlines. Black woman being harassed by white captain for no reason other than bias. This is not the America I served to protect. Share this everywhere. The hashtags were multiplying organically. Christmas Eve shame had started trending alongside Aurora 447. Pilot bias was gaining traction. Justice for Jasmine appeared, even though most viewers still didn't know her name. Marcus Rivera had reached David Park at Aurora's executive offices, and the phone conversation was becoming increasingly urgent. "David, you need to understand," Marcus said quietly from the galley phone. "This is being live-streamed. We're looking at thousands of people watching our captain discriminate against a first-class passenger. The hashtags are already trending." David Park felt his stomach drop. As Aurora's crisis management executive, he'd dealt with plenty of passenger complaints and crew incidents, but he'd never faced a situation that was going viral in real time. His first instinct was to contact the cockpit directly, but he knew that would likely make Hamilton even more defensive. "Marcus, I need you to get me a passenger manifest for that flight immediately," David said, "and find out everything you can about the passenger in seat 2A. Something about this situation feels bigger than a standard seating dispute." As David pulled up the flight information on his computer, he had no idea he was looking at a passenger manifest that included his own boss. Jasmine Brooks' name appeared as J. Brooks, and nothing in Aurora's booking system indicated that she was anything other than a last-minute business traveler. The social media wildfire was spreading faster than anyone on the ground or in the air could control, and Aurora Airlines was about to face the most expensive public relations crisis in the company's history. But the real shock was still coming. Captain Derek Hamilton felt the walls closing in around him, but instead of retreating, his pride pushed him deeper into the confrontation. The presence of cameras, The support Jasmine was receiving from other passengers and the obvious tension among his crew should have warned him to de-escalate. Instead, Hamilton saw challenges to his authority that demanded an even stronger response. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hamilton announced to the entire first-class cabin, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd perfected over 2 decades of commanding aircraft. "I apologize for this disruption to your Christmas Eve travel. We're dealing with a passenger verification issue that needs to be resolved before departure." He turned back to Jasmine, his eyes cold with determination. "Ma'am, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to resolve this situation cooperatively. You can move voluntarily to seat 47E in our economy section, or I will call Port Authority Police to remove you from this aircraft." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Every passenger in first class understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't a simple seating dispute anymore. This was a moment that would define careers, change lives, and possibly reshape how airlines treated their customers. Jasmine looked up at Hamilton with the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty about one's position. She had spent months preparing for exactly this moment, though she'd hoped it would never come. The test had worked too well. Hamilton wasn't just showing bias. He was demonstrating the kind of flagrant discrimination that would require the harshest possible response. Captain Hamilton Jasmine said, her voice steady and clear enough for every recording device to capture, "I will move to seat 47E. But before I do, I want you to understand something very clearly. You should know that I'm recording this conversation for the Aurora Airlines Board of Directors." Hamilton scoffed his arrogance, preventing him from recognizing the warning in her words. "Ma'am, you can record whatever you want. The board supports its captains when we maintain proper standards and passenger safety." Emma Rodriguez's live stream had reached 500 viewers, and the comments section was exploding with outrage. Viewers were demanding she get Jasmine's name, posting links to Aurora's customer service numbers and organizing boycotts in real time. The hashtag Aurora447 was now trending nationally. Preston Blackwood III chose this moment to make his position clear, speaking loudly enough to ensure the cameras captured his words. "Captain, I appreciate you handling this situation professionally. Some people think they can game the system, but Aurora has standards for a reason." His casual endorsement of Hamilton's discrimination was so blatant that even passengers who hadn't been paying attention turned to stare. Preston's sense of entitlement was absolute, and he genuinely believed he was supporting proper order by backing Hamilton's actions. Victoria Shaw immediately captured Preston's statement on her legal recording, recognizing that his words provided crucial evidence of the discriminatory motivation behind Hamilton's demands. In litigation, having a witness explicitly state that certain people didn't deserve equal treatment was prosecutorial gold. Harold Thompson stood up again, his military bearing commanding attention throughout the cabin. "Captain Hamilton," he said in a voice that had once led troops into combat, "I've watched you target this woman for 15 minutes, and you haven't given a single legitimate reason for removing her. What you're doing is wrong, and everyone here knows it." Hamilton wheeled around to face Harold, his face flushing with anger at being challenged by someone he'd expected to support him automatically. "Sir, you're out of line. I'm the captain of this aircraft, and my authority is absolute when it comes to passenger safety." "This isn't about safety," Harold shot back. "This is about bias, and you're destroying your career and Aurora's reputation because you can't see past your own prejudices." Sophia Martinez was watching the confrontation with growing horror. In 4 months with Aurora, she'd been taught that customer service was paramount, and that crew members should de-escalate conflicts, not create them. Hamilton's behavior violated everything she'd learned about professional aviation service. Marcus Rivera had finished his call with David Park and was now standing near the cockpit trying to catch James Mitchell's attention. The first officer was clearly uncomfortable with his captain's behavior but seemed frozen between loyalty and professionalism. James Marcus said quietly. "David Park needs to speak with Captain Hamilton immediately. This situation is becoming a company-wide crisis." James looked at the scene in the first-class cabin, where his captain was now engaged in a shouting match with passengers while multiple cameras recorded every word. His own career was tied to Hamilton's, and James realized he was watching both their futures disintegrate in real time. Jasmine began gathering her belongings with deliberate calm, maintaining her dignity, even as she prepared to comply with Hamilton's discriminatory demand. Her movements were measured and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos Hamilton was creating around her. "You're really doing this?" Victoria Shaw said to Hamilton, her lawyer's voice carrying a note of amazement at his self-destructive behavior. "You're actually going to force a paying first-class passenger to move to economy because of your personal biases in front of multiple witnesses and recording devices." Hamilton's response revealed the depth of his delusion about his own authority and righteousness. "Ma'am, I've been flying for Aurora Airlines for 23 years. I've never had a passenger complaint upheld against me. The company trusts my judgment about passenger placement and cabin management." What Hamilton didn't know was that his complaint record had been artificially clean because Aurora's previous management had buried reports rather than addressed them. The new ownership had different standards, and those buried complaints were about to surface with devastating effect. Emma's livestream chat had become a coordinating center for social media activism. Viewers were posting Aurora's corporate contact information, organizing Twitter campaigns, and sharing the stream to Facebook, TikTok, and Reddit. The incident was spreading across every major social platform simultaneously. Jasmine stood up from seat 2A, her tablet case in hand, and looked directly at Hamilton. "Captain Hamilton, you've made your decision. I'll move to economy as you've demanded. But I want you to remember this moment, because you're going to regret this for the rest of your life." Hamilton heard her words as a threat from a disgruntled passenger, not a warning from someone with the power to destroy him. His arrogance was so complete that he actually smiled as he watched her gather her belongings. "Ma'am," Hamilton said with smug satisfaction, "empty threats don't intimidate me. I've handled difficult passengers before, and I'll handle them again." Aurora Airlines doesn't negotiate with people who try to manipulate their way into services they haven't earned. As Jasmine walked toward the economy section, every passenger in first class understood they were witnessing an injustice that would demand consequences. What none of them knew was that the consequences had already been set in motion, and Captain Hamilton had just fired the person who signed his paychecks. The most expensive walk in aviation history was about to begin, and Hamilton was still celebrating his victory. Jasmine Brooks walked down the narrow aisle toward economy class, her measured pace and composed demeanor creating a stark contrast to the chaos Captain Hamilton had unleashed in first class. Every step she took was being recorded by multiple passengers, and her dignity under pressure was making Hamilton's behavior look increasingly cruel and unprofessional. As she passed through the business class section, passengers looked up from their devices and conversations, sensing something significant was happening. The flight attendants stationed in business class watched with confusion as a first-class passenger carrying expensive luggage walked toward the back of the plane, followed by the obvious tension radiating from the premium cabin. Seat 47E was exactly what Hamilton had intended a punishment. Middle seat in the last row of economy, between a crying infant and a passenger who had clearly been drinking heavily in the airport lounge. The seat back was broken, stuck in an upright position that would make sleeping impossible during the 7-hour flight. Jasmine surveyed her new accommodations without complaint. She'd sat in worse seats during her undercover testing of Aurora's service standards, and this particular humiliation was providing exactly the evidence she needed to justify the reforms she'd been planning. Emma Rodriguez had followed Jasmine's progress with her live stream, and her audience had grown to over 5,000 viewers. The comments section was now a torrent of outrage, legal advice, and demands for justice that Emma couldn't keep up with reading. "This is unbelievable," Emma whispered to her camera while filming Jasmine's dignified settlement into the uncomfortable seat. "They've moved her to literally the worst seat on the plane. The baby next to her is screaming, and I can smell alcohol from here. This is so obviously retaliation." Back in first class, Hamilton was basking in what he believed was a successful assertion of his authority. Preston Blackwood III had immediately claimed Seat 2A, settling into the premium space with the satisfaction of someone who believed the natural order had been restored. "Thank you," Captain Preston said loud enough for the remaining passengers and cameras to hear. "It's refreshing to see professional standards maintained. Too many airlines cave to pressure these days." Preston's casual cruelty was so complete that even Hamilton looked momentarily uncomfortable. But the captain's ego was too invested in the confrontation to acknowledge that his ally's words revealed the discriminatory nature of his own actions. Victoria Shaw was furiously typing legal notes into her phone while continuing to record the aftermath. Her litigation experience told her that Aurora Airlines had just created liability that could reach into tens of millions of dollars, and the evidence was being captured from multiple angles by multiple witnesses. Harold Thompson remained standing, his military posture radiating disapproval as he watched Preston enjoy the fruits of Hamilton's discrimination. Captain Harold said in a voice that carried moral authority, "I hope you understand what you've just done to that woman and to your own company." Hamilton was still too high on his perceived victory to recognize the danger in Harold's words. "Sir, I've maintained proper passenger placement and cabin standards. Aurora Airlines will support my decision." Meanwhile, in Aurora's Crisis Management Center, David Park was frantically trying to understand the scope of the social media disaster that was unfolding in real time. The hashtags Aurora447 and Christmas Eve Shame were trending nationally with thousands of posts demanding accountability and threatening boycotts. David's assistant burst into his office carrying printouts of the most viral social media posts. "Mr. Park, this is exploding across every platform. We're getting tagged in posts from celebrities, politicians, and civil rights organizations. The live stream has hit 10,000 viewers." David felt sick as he realized the magnitude of the crisis. "Get me the passenger manifest for Flight 447 immediately, and find out everything we can about the passenger in Seat 2A. I need to understand why Captain Hamilton targeted her specifically." As David's team pulled up the booking information, they saw J. Brooks listed with a corporate booking code that required special clearance. David's blood ran cold as he realized what that booking code meant. "Oh my God," David whispered as the full scope of the disaster became clear. J. Brooks, Jasmine Brooks. Hamilton just discriminated against the owner of Aurora Airlines. Back on the aircraft, Jasmine was making a phone call that would change everything. In the privacy of economy class, surrounded by passengers who had no idea who she was, she dialed a number that connected directly to Aurora's board of directors. "David," she said, when Park answered his emergency line, "it's happening again. Flight 447. My test worked too well." David Park's voice was tight with panic. "Ms. Brooks, I'm so sorry. We're tracking the social media coverage. I had no idea you were on that flight. I'm going to call Captain Hamilton immediately." "No," Jasmine said calmly. "Let this play out. I want to see how far he'll go when he thinks nobody important is watching. This is exactly the evidence I needed to justify the changes we discussed." David understood immediately. Aurora's new owner had been planning comprehensive reforms to address the discrimination complaints that had been buried by previous management. Hamilton's behavior was providing the justification for those reforms in the most public way possible. "Ma'am, David said the social media coverage is massive. This is going to be national news by morning. Are you sure you want to let this continue, David?" Jasmine replied, "I've been preparing for this moment since I was 12 years old. Hamilton doesn't know it yet, but he just declared war on someone who owns the battlefield." In the first-class cabin, Sophia Martinez was experiencing her own crisis of conscience. She'd watched Captain Hamilton destroy a passenger's dignity while crew members stood silently, and her training was clear about the obligation to report discrimination to supervisors. Sophia approached Marcus Rivera, who was monitoring the situation from the forward galley. "Marcus, should I be filing an incident report about this?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Sophia, start documenting everything you witnessed. This is going to end up in federal court, and Aurora's going to need crew testimony about what actually happened." James Mitchell finally found the courage to confront his captain directly. As Hamilton returned to the cockpit area, still glowing with satisfaction, James blocked his path. "Derek." "What the hell was that?" James demanded in a low voice. "You just humiliated a paying passenger in front of cameras and witnesses. This is going to destroy both our careers." Hamilton was dismissive, his arrogance preventing him from seeing the disaster he'd created. "James, that woman was trying to game the system. I've seen it before. Give them an inch and they'll take over the whole cabin. Sometimes you have to maintain standards forcefully. You had no legitimate reason to move her," James pressed. "Her ticket was valid, her behavior was appropriate, and now we're looking at a discrimination lawsuit that could bankrupt the company." Hamilton's response revealed the depth of his delusion. "James, I've been flying for Aurora for 23 years. I know what our passengers look like, and she didn't fit. The company will back me up because they know I maintain their standards." What Hamilton didn't know was that Aurora's new ownership had very different standards, and his behavior had just violated every one of them in the most public way possible. Emma Rodriguez's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers, making it one of the most watched real-time discrimination incidents in social media history. The comments section was coordinating boycotts, legal support, and media campaigns that would continue growing long after the flight landed. In economy class, Jasmine sat quietly between the crying baby and the intoxicated passenger working on her tablet as if nothing unusual had happened. Her calm in the face of discrimination was making Hamilton's aggression look even worse by comparison, and every passenger who saw her understood that they'd witnessed something profound. The power Hamilton thought he'd demonstrated was already evaporating. Real power was sitting in seat 47E, planning the complete transformation of the airline industry's approach to passenger discrimination, and Captain Derek Hamilton had just become the unwitting catalyst for changes he couldn't imagine. Aurora Airlines was about to learn that their new owner didn't just talk about equality. She was prepared to enforce it with the full weight of her authority, and Hamilton's career was about to become a cautionary tale about the cost of bias in the modern era. The documentation of Captain Hamilton's discrimination was happening on multiple levels simultaneously, creating an unprecedented record of bias in action that would soon become evidence in legal proceedings, training materials for corporate sensitivity programs, and a viral case study in how quickly careers can be destroyed by prejudice. Emma Rodriguez's Instagram live stream had evolved beyond simple documentation into a coordinating center for justice activism. Her 18,000 viewers were no longer passive observers. They had become an engaged community, demanding accountability and organizing real-world consequences for what they were witnessing. "You guys, this is incredible," Emma said to her camera while ensuring Jasmine remained in frame from her economy seat. "I'm getting messages from people saying they're canceling Aurora reservations right now. There are lawyers in the comments offering to represent her for free. Someone said #Aurora447 is trending worldwide." The live chat had become a scroll of outrage that moved too fast to read completely. Viewers were posting Aurora's corporate contact information, sharing the stream to every social media platform, and coordinating with influencers and activists to amplify the message. Emma had inadvertently become the citizen journalist documenting one of the most significant discrimination incidents of the digital age. Victoria Shaw's documentation was more methodical but equally damaging to Aurora Airlines. As a senior litigation attorney, she understood the evidential value of every word and gesture she was capturing on her multiple devices. Her professional network was watching through her social media accounts, and their legal expertise was guiding the documentation process in real time. I'm creating a time-stamped record of every discriminatory statement Victoria announced to her LinkedIn followers in a post that was being shared rapidly through legal and business networks. Captain Hamilton's behavior constitutes textbook racial discrimination, and Aurora Airlines is creating massive corporate liability by failing to intervene. Her legal analysis was being read by employment attorneys, civil rights organizations, and corporate executives who understood the implications of such public discrimination. Victoria's documentation would later become the foundation for legal action that would transform airline industry policies nationwide. Harold Thompson was using his military precision to document the tactical aspects of Hamilton's behavior. His Facebook posts were being shared through veteran networks, military associations, and patriotic organizations that viewed the discrimination as an affront to the values they'd served to protect. Brothers and sisters, Harold wrote in a post that would reach 50,000 shares within hours, watching disgraceful behavior on Aurora Airlines Flight 447. White captain using his authority to humiliate black passenger for no reason other than bias. This is not the America we swore to defend. Every share helps expose this injustice. The veteran networks were particularly powerful because they commanded respect across political divisions. Harold's military credibility was giving the incident reach into communities that might otherwise dismiss discrimination claims, making the social media momentum even more unstoppable. Sophia Martinez and Marcus Rivera were creating the internal documentation that would prove crucial when Aurora faced federal investigations. Their crew incident reports were being filed in real time, creating an official airline record of Hamilton's behavior that couldn't be buried or dismissed by sympathetic supervisors. I'm documenting every policy violation, Marcus explained to Sophia as they worked from the galley. Captain Hamilton exceeded his authority, created a hostile environment for passengers, and violated Aurora's anti-discrimination guidelines. This paperwork is going to corporate tonight. Sophia's hands were shaking as she wrote her statement, but her words were clear and damning. Captain Hamilton targeted passenger Jay Brooks based solely on appearance and assumed she didn't belong in first class. His behavior was discriminatory, unprofessional, and created distress for crew and passengers. I believe his actions violated federal civil rights laws. Their documentation would later prove that crew members had recognized the discrimination and reported it appropriately, protecting them from liability, while ensuring Aurora couldn't claim ignorance about Hamilton's behavior. James Mitchell was facing his own documentation crisis. As first officer, he was required to report any safety or professional issues involving his captain, but he'd remained silent during the discrimination incident. His failure to intervene was creating its own liability, and he finally understood that his career was tied to Hamilton's sinking ship. James began his own incident report, trying to balance loyalty to his captain with the growing realization that Hamilton's behavior was indefensible. Captain Hamilton engaged in passenger confrontation that appeared motivated by racial bias. I failed to intervene appropriately and take command when the captain's behavior created safety and legal issues. I accept responsibility for this failure in leadership. His honest self-assessment would later save his career, while Hamilton's continued defiance would destroy his own. Preston Blackwood III was creating his own documentation problem through his social media activity. Unaware that his words were being recorded by multiple passengers, Preston was posting his own version of events on his privileged social networks, revealing the entitled mindset that had supported Hamilton's discrimination. Finally, had a captain with the backbone to maintain standards on Aurora, Preston posted to his exclusive prep school alumni network. Too many airlines let anybody sit anywhere these days. Good to see professionalism restored. His posts were being screenshot and shared by people who had access to his networks, providing additional evidence of the discriminatory motivation behind Hamilton's actions. Preston's casual racism was so blatant that it strengthened the case against both him and Hamilton. Emma's stream had reached 25,000 live viewers and was being recorded by dozens of people who understood its historical significance. The hashtags had evolved beyond Aurora 447 to include Christmas Eve Justice Airline Discrimination and Jasmine Deserves. Better, even though most viewers still didn't know Jasmine's full name or true identity. The documentation was creating its own momentum. News outlets were picking up the story from social media, with reporters reaching out to Emma directly for interviews. Celebrity activists were sharing the stream, amplifying the message to millions of additional followers. Dr. Angela Davis retweeted Emma's thread with the comment, "This is what modern discrimination looks like. Institutional power wielded against individual dignity. Every person sharing this helps expose the bias that still poisons our society." Corporate crisis management experts watching the streams were recognizing that Aurora Airlines was facing the kind of public relations disaster that could permanently damage their brand. The documentation was so comprehensive and damaging that no amount of corporate spin could minimize the impact. In economy class, Jasmine was quietly monitoring the social media coverage on her tablet, watching her own discrimination become a viral case study in institutional bias. She could see the hashtags trending, read the legal analysis from attorneys like Victoria Shaw, and track the growing calls for accountability. But Jasmine also understood something the documentarians didn't. This incident was about to become much bigger than anyone realized. The woman being discriminated against wasn't just another passenger. She was the owner of Aurora Airlines, and the documentation being created would soon provide the evidence for the most comprehensive airline industry reforms in decades. The witnesses thought they were recording an injustice that needed exposure. What they were actually documenting was the catalyst for transformation that would change how airlines treated passengers forever. And Captain Hamilton, still unaware of his victim's true identity, was about to learn that the most damaging documentation was the evidence he was providing of his own bias and unfitness for command. Jasmine Brooks sat in seat 47E, surrounded by the chaos of economy class on Christmas Eve, appearing to any observer as just another victim of airline discrimination. The baby beside her continued crying. The intoxicated passenger was snoring loudly, and the broken seatback forced her to remain upright while other passengers enjoyed the reclining comfort she'd paid for in first class. But appearances were deceiving. While Captain Hamilton celebrated his victory and basked in Preston Blackwood's approval, Jasmine was methodically documenting every aspect of Aurora Airlines' failure to protect her from discrimination. Her tablet displayed internal company reports, employee performance evaluations, and discrimination complaints that had been buried by previous management. Most importantly, she was building the case for transformative changes that would extend far beyond punishing Hamilton. Jasmine had spent 6 months investigating Aurora's culture, and tonight's incident was providing the final evidence she needed to justify comprehensive reforms. Emma Rodriguez was conducting what had essentially become a live interview with Jasmine, though neither of them was using those terms. Emma's journalistic instincts were guiding her to ask questions that drew out the broader implications of what they'd witnessed. "Can you tell us how this makes you feel?" Emma asked, holding her phone steady while keeping the live stream focused on Jasmine's composed face. "I mean, you paid for first class, you were doing nothing wrong, and they just humiliated you in front of everyone." Jasmine's response was careful and strategic, designed to convey dignity while building the record of Aurora's discrimination. "Emma, what happened tonight isn't just about me. It's about a culture that assumes certain people don't belong in certain places. Some people judge by appearance and never expect the janitor to own the building." The phrase resonated with Emma's 30,000 live viewers who began analyzing every word in the comments. "The janitor owns the building" became an instant meme shared across platforms as viewers speculated about its meaning. Some thought it was metaphorical. Others wondered if Jasmine had inside knowledge about Aurora Airlines. Victoria Shaw caught the phrase immediately and understood its legal significance. In discrimination cases, statements suggesting hidden authority or insider knowledge often indicated that the victim had more power than the perpetrators realized. Victoria began researching Jasmine's background while continuing to document the incident. Harold Thompson approached Jasmine's economy section, his military bearing commanding respect even in the cramped space. "Young lady," he said quietly, "I want you to know that not all of us supported what happened to you. That captain's behavior was disgraceful, and anyone with integrity could see it." Jasmine smiled at Harold with genuine warmth. "Thank you for speaking up. It takes courage to challenge authority when you see injustice, especially when other people are staying silent." Harold nodded, but something in Jasmine's demeanor struck him as unusual. She was calm in a way that suggested confidence rather than resignation, and her language was more sophisticated than he'd expected from someone who appeared to be traveling alone without apparent wealth or status. "Can I ask?" Harold said carefully. "Are you in a position to do something about this? Because what happened to you was wrong, and that captain needs to face consequences." Jasmine's response was measured but carried an undertone that made Harold pay closer attention. "Mr. Thompson, I believe everyone faces consequences for their actions eventually. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like." Back in first class, Preston Blackwood was posting updates to his social media networks, unaware that his privileged perspective was providing additional evidence of the discrimination he'd supported. His Instagram story included a photo from seat 2A with the caption, "Finally got my usual seat back. Sometimes you have to let airline staff do their job instead of caving to every complaint." Preston's posts were being screenshot and shared by people who had access to his social networks, adding another layer of documentation to an already comprehensive record of discrimination. His casual entitlement was so blatant that it was strengthening the case against Aurora Airlines. Sophia Martinez was struggling with her own conscience as she served the first-class passengers who had witnessed Hamilton's discrimination. She'd been trained to provide exceptional service, but serving Preston in the seat he'd obtained through discriminatory means felt like participating in the injustice. Marcus Rivera recognized Sophia's distress and pulled her aside for a conversation that would later prove crucial to Aurora's internal investigation. "Sophia, you did the right thing by speaking up. Don't let Hamilton's behavior make you question your own professionalism." "But I could have done more," Sophia said, tears in her eyes. "I should have refused to serve Preston in that seat, or called the ground supervisor earlier, or stood up to Captain Hamilton more forcefully." "You're a junior crew member challenging a senior captain," Marcus replied. "The fact that you spoke up at all took courage. Document everything you witnessed, because this incident is going to require testimony from everyone who saw what happened." Their conversation was overheard by Victoria Shaw, who understood the value of crew testimony in discrimination cases. She approached Sophia discreetly and handed her a business card. "Sophia, I'm an attorney, and what you witnessed tonight was clear discrimination. If anyone tries to retaliate against you for speaking up, you call me immediately. Your testimony is going to be crucial for ensuring justice." Sophia looked at the card with surprise. She'd never expected that speaking up for a passenger would lead to contact with attorneys and potential legal action. But she was beginning to understand that Hamilton's discrimination had created consequences that would extend far beyond the flight. Meanwhile, David Park was frantically trying to manage a crisis that was spiraling beyond Aurora's ability to control. The social media coverage had reached national news outlets, and reporters were calling for statements about Flight 447's discrimination incident. Sir David's assistant said, bursting into his office with printed social media reports, "This is trending on every platform. We've got celebrities, politicians, and civil rights organizations demanding accountability. The passenger in seat 2A is being called a hero for maintaining her dignity under discrimination." David stared at the reports, knowing that the passenger everyone was calling a hero was actually Aurora's owner, and that Captain Hamilton had just created the most expensive discrimination incident in airline industry history. "Get me a direct line to the cockpit," David ordered. "I need to speak with Captain Hamilton immediately before this gets any worse." But as David reached for the phone to make the call that would begin Hamilton's downfall, He realized that the situation was already beyond damage control. The evidence was documented, the witnesses were aligned, and the victim was the one person who had absolute authority to ensure that consequences would be swift and permanent. Aurora Airlines was about to face a reckoning that would transform the industry's approach to passenger discrimination, and Captain Derek Hamilton had unknowingly provided the catalyst for changes he could never have imagined. The setup was complete. The documentation was comprehensive. The witnesses were ready. And the victim was about to reveal that she had the power to turn Hamilton's moment of perceived triumph into the greatest professional disaster of his life. The phone in Aurora Flight 447's cockpit rang with an urgency that cut through the post-departure routine. Captain Derek Hamilton, still basking in what he believed was his successful assertion of authority, glanced at the caller ID and saw Aurora Airlines Executive Operations. His first instinct was to ignore the call, assuming it was routine administrative business that could wait until after takeoff. But the phone kept ringing with the insistence of someone who wouldn't be ignored. James Mitchell, his first officer, looked at Hamilton with growing concern. Executive Operations didn't typically call aircraft during departure sequences unless something was seriously wrong. Captain James said quietly, "That's the fourth ring. Executive Operations Protocol says we have to answer urgent calls during passenger-related incidents." Hamilton's jaw tightened as he realized that his passenger confrontation might have triggered corporate attention. He'd been confident that Aurora's management would support his decision to maintain cabin standards, but the persistent ringing suggested a level of concern he hadn't anticipated. Captain Hamilton speaking. He answered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected corporate backing for his actions. "Derek, this is David Park from Executive Crisis Management. We need to talk immediately about the passenger situation on your flight." Hamilton's confidence faltered slightly. David Park wasn't just any Aurora executive. He was the company's chief crisis manager, called in only when situations threatened corporate liability or public relations disasters. David Fursch handled a passenger verification issue according to standard protocols. Hamilton replied defensive but still confident. "We had someone in first class who didn't meet verification standards, and I relocated her to appropriate seating." There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough for Hamilton to wonder if the connection had been lost. When David spoke again, his voice carried a tension that made James Mitchell look up from his pre-flight checklist. "Derek." David said carefully, "Please tell me you didn't just force a passenger to move from first class based solely on your personal assessment of whether she belonged there." "I used my professional judgment about passenger placement," Hamilton replied, his defensive tone growing stronger. "The passenger in question didn't fit Aurora's first-class demographic, and we had a legitimate VIP requesting that seat." Another pause, longer this time. James could hear David's heavy breathing through the cockpit speakers, and the first officer began to realize that his captain might have made a catastrophic mistake. "Derek," David continued, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Are we talking about the passenger in seat 2A, the one who was moved to economy?" "That's correct," Hamilton said, his certainty beginning to waver as he detected something ominous in David's tone. "J. Brooks, last-minute addition to the manifest with questionable verification." The silence that followed was so complete that Hamilton wondered if the phone had died. When David finally spoke, his words hit the cockpit like a physical blow. "Derek, please tell me you didn't just discriminate against Jasmine Brooks." Hamilton felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he didn't understand why the passenger's full name would matter to Aurora's crisis management team. "I handled a passenger verification issue," Hamilton repeated, though his voice now carried a note of uncertainty. "Who is Jasmine Brooks?" David Park's response would replay in Hamilton's mind for the rest of his life. "Derek, Jasmine Brooks is the owner of Aurora Airlines. You just humiliated your boss in front of 30,000 people who are watching this live on social media." The words hit Hamilton like a decompression event. His vision tunneled, his hearing became muffled, and for a moment he couldn't process what he'd just heard. The confident captain who had asserted his authority over a passenger he deemed unworthy was suddenly face to face with the reality that he'd just destroyed his career by discriminating against the woman who signed his paychecks. "That's impossible," Hamilton said, though his voice had lost all its authority. She was dressed casually. She didn't look like what Derek David's voice carried the weight of someone documenting evidence for what was clearly going to be a termination hearing. "What exactly does the owner of Aurora Airlines look like?" James Mitchell was staring at his captain with growing horror as the implications became clear. He'd watched Hamilton discriminate against a passenger based on racial bias, and that passenger was apparently their employer. James began to understand that his own career was tied to Hamilton's catastrophic mistake. "David Hamilton," said, his voice now pleading, "if this is true, it was a misunderstanding. I was trying to maintain Aurora's standards. I had no idea who she was." "That's exactly the problem," Derek David replied. "You made assumptions about who deserves respect based on appearance and race. The fact that you didn't know she owns the company makes it worse, not better." Hamilton's world was collapsing in real time. Everything he'd believed about his value to Aurora, his authority as captain, and his ability to make passenger decisions was disintegrating with every word from David Park. "What do I do?" Hamilton asked the question of someone who finally understood that his situation was beyond salvaging. "Derek, you're going to return to first class and personally apologize to Ms. Brooks," David said. "You're going to restore her to seat 2A with full upgrade compensation. You're going to ensure that every passenger who witnessed your discrimination understands that Aurora Airlines does not tolerate bias in any form." And then Hamilton asked, though he already knew the answer. "And then you're going to submit your resignation effective immediately upon landing, Ms. Brooks has full authority to terminate anyone in Aurora's employ, and your behavior tonight has created liability that could bankrupt this company." Hamilton looked around the cockpit that had been his domain for 23 years, realizing that he was about to lose everything because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. His career, his reputation, his pension, and his future were all forfeit because he'd assumed that a black woman in casual clothes didn't deserve the same respect he automatically gave to white passengers. James Hamilton said to his first officer, "You'll need to take command. I have to go fix the biggest mistake of my life." But as Hamilton prepared to face the consequences of his discrimination, he didn't yet understand that the biggest mistake wasn't just discriminating against a passenger. The biggest mistake was discriminating against someone who had spent her entire life fighting bias and now had the power to ensure that his behavior would never be repeated by anyone in the airline industry. Captain Derek Hamilton was about to learn that some apologies come too late, and some consequences are permanent. The walk from economy back to first class was the longest in Captain Derek Hamilton's 23-year career. Every step felt like a march toward his own execution, and the passengers who had witnessed his discrimination watched his return with a mixture of anticipation and judgment that made his uniform feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Emma Rodriguez's live stream had reached 40,000 viewers, and the comment section was exploding with speculation about why the captain was returning to the scene of his discriminatory behavior. The hashtag Aurora447 was trending globally now, with news outlets picking up the story and celebrities beginning to share the stream. "You guys, something big is happening," Emma whispered to her camera as she followed Hamilton's progress from economy back to first class. "The captain just got a phone call, and now he's walking back to where everything started. His face is completely white. I think he found out something that changed everything." Victoria Shaw was positioned perfectly to capture Hamilton's return, and her legal instincts told her that whatever was about to happen would be the climax of the most documented discrimination case in airline industry history. Her phone was recording while she typed legal observations for her social media followers. Legal update: Aurora captain returning to first class after phone call from corporate. His body language suggests he's learned something that fundamentally changed his understanding of the situation. This is typically when discrimination cases become truly expensive for companies. Harold Thompson watched Hamilton's approach with the satisfaction of someone who had served long enough to recognize when authority figures were about to face consequences for their actions. The veteran's military experience had taught him to identify moments when power structures were about to shift dramatically. Hamilton stopped at seat 47E, where Jasmine was still sitting calmly between the crying baby and intoxicated passenger working on her tablet, as if nothing unusual had happened. Her composure in the face of discrimination had made Hamilton's aggression look even worse throughout the entire incident. Ms. Brooks Hamilton said, his voice stripped of the authority it had carried earlier. "I need to speak with you." Jasmine looked up from her tablet with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the evening. "Of course, Captain Hamilton. What can I do for you?" The irony of Hamilton asking what she could do for him after spending an hour telling her what she needed to do for him wasn't lost on the passengers who were recording every word. "Ma'am, I've been informed that there was a misunderstanding about your status with Aurora Airlines." Hamilton said the words coming out like he was choking on them. "I need to ask you to return to seat 2A in first class." Emma's livestream audience was going wild in the comments. Viewers were speculating about who Jasmine really was, why the captain's attitude had changed completely, and what kind of phone call could transform a discrimination situation so dramatically. Jasmine closed her tablet and looked at Hamilton with an expression that was perfectly neutral but somehow managed to convey complete control over the situation. "Captain Hamilton, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm comfortable here. Seat 47E has given me a very educational perspective on Aurora's service standards." Hamilton felt sweat beading on his forehead as he realized that Jasmine wasn't going to make this easy for him. David Park had been clear that Hamilton's career depended on making this right, but Jasmine seemed to understand that she held all the power now. "Ms. Brooks, please," Hamilton said, his desperation beginning to show. "I need you to return to first class. There's been a serious error in judgment that needs to be corrected." Preston Blackwood III watched from seat 2A with growing confusion and alarm. He'd spent the evening enjoying the premium space and supporting Hamilton's discrimination, but now the captain was begging the woman he'd humiliated to return. Preston's entitled worldview couldn't process what was happening. Captain Preston called out, "Surely this passenger can remain where you placed her. I'm quite comfortable in seat 2A. Jasmine stood up from her economy seat and looked directly at Preston with an expression that made him shrink back into the premium leather. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that filled the entire cabin. "Mr. Blackwood, you'll be moving to economy shortly," she said with complete confidence. "In fact, you'll be lucky if you're allowed to remain on this aircraft at all." Preston's mouth fell open in shock. The woman Hamilton had discriminated against was speaking to him like someone who had absolute authority over his travel arrangements, and her certainty suggested she wasn't bluffing. Jasmine walked back toward first class with a measured pace that commanded attention from every passenger and crew member. This time, she wasn't being forced to move. She was choosing to return, and the difference in her bearing was unmistakable. When she reached seat 2A, she looked at Preston with an expression that made him scramble out of the premium space without being asked. Then she turned to address the entire first-class cabin, her voice clear and strong enough for all the recording devices to capture every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jasmine Brooks. I am the owner and CEO of Aurora Airlines. For the past 6 months, I've been conducting undercover testing of our service standards to identify discrimination and bias in our operations." The silence that followed was absolute. Emma's livestream chat exploded with caps-locked messages of shock and excitement. Victoria Shaw's legal mind was already calculating the implications of what she was hearing. Harold Thompson smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been completely vindicated. But Captain Hamilton felt his world end completely. Tonight, Captain Hamilton provided exactly the evidence I needed to justify comprehensive reforms throughout Aurora's operations. Jasmine continued. His behavior represents the kind of bias that has no place in modern aviation, and it will not be tolerated under my ownership." Hamilton stood frozen, understanding that every word Jasmine spoke was being recorded by thousands of people and would soon be seen by millions more. His discrimination hadn't just cost him his job, it had made him the poster child for everything wrong with airline culture. "Captain Hamilton," Jasmine said, turning to face him directly, "you didn't just lose a passenger tonight. You lost your wings." The phrase hit the cabin like a judgment. Hamilton's 23-year career was over. His reputation was destroyed, and his legacy would be as the captain who discriminated against his own boss on Christmas Eve while the world watched. Emma's live stream had reached 60,000 viewers, making it the most-watched real-time discrimination incident in social media history. The story was spreading across every platform simultaneously, with Jasmine's reveal becoming an instant viral moment that would reshape how airlines approached passenger treatment. As Hamilton stood in his uniform, stripped of all authority and facing the consequences of his bias, Jasmine Brooks sat down in seat 2A with the quiet dignity of someone who had turned the worst kind of discrimination into the catalyst for transformative change. The passenger had become the boss. The victim had become the judge. And Captain Derek Hamilton had become a cautionary tale about the cost of prejudice in an age where power could belong to anyone, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. The revelation that Jasmine Brooks owned Aurora Airlines hit Flight 447 like a psychological shockwave. In an instant, every power dynamic on the aircraft had reversed completely. The passenger who had been humiliated and forced to economy was revealed as the ultimate authority, while the captain who had wielded his authority so carelessly was exposed as powerless. Emma Rodriguez's live stream audience had exploded to over 75,000 viewers, with comments moving so fast they were impossible to read. Her follower count was growing by the thousands as news outlets and social media influencers shared her stream worldwide. Emma had accidentally become the citizen journalist who documented one of the most significant reversals of power in aviation history. "This is unreal," Emma whispered to her camera, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "She owns the airline. The woman they discriminated against actually owns Aurora Airlines. Captain Hamilton just lost his job to someone he tried to kick off the plane." Victoria Shaw was furiously typing legal analysis for her social media followers, recognizing that she was witnessing corporate justice being delivered in real time. Her professional network was watching through her posts, and the legal implications were staggering. Legal analysis update: Aurora Airlines owner conducting live termination hearing after experiencing direct discrimination. This is how corporate accountability happens when victims have power. Every law school will study this case. Jasmine looked at Captain Hamilton with an expression that was calm but absolutely final. "Captain Hamilton, your employment with Aurora Airlines is terminated effective immediately. James Mitchell will assume command of this aircraft, and you will be escorted off the plane when we land in London." The words hit Hamilton like physical blows. 23 years of service, a spotless technical record, and a reputation as Aurora's premier captain were all erased in a single moment because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. "Ms. Brooks Hamilton," began his voice, pleading, "I had no idea who you were. If I had known—" "That's exactly the problem," Jasmine interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuses. "You treat people differently based on assumptions about their worth. The fact that you discriminated against your own boss makes it worse, not better." She turned to address Preston Blackwood III, who had been watching the revelation with growing horror as he realized that his support for Hamilton's discrimination was being recorded for posterity. "Mr. Blackwood, your behavior tonight was equally unacceptable. You encouraged discrimination, claimed privilege based on your father's position, and showed complete disrespect for another passenger's dignity. You're banned from Aurora Airlines for life." Preston's face went white as he understood that his entitled support for Hamilton's bias had just cost him access to his preferred airline. His casual racism had consequences, and those consequences were being documented by thousands of viewers. "You can't ban me," Preston protested, his voice carrying the whine of someone unaccustomed to facing accountability. "My father is a senator. Aurora needs our business." Jasmine's response was swift and decisive. "Mr. Blackwood, your father's position doesn't grant you the right to participate in discrimination. Aurora Airlines serves passengers who treat others with dignity, and you've demonstrated that you're not capable of meeting that standard." Sophia Martinez was watching the scene unfold with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by seeing justice delivered to the passengers and crew members who had witnessed Hamilton's discrimination. Her decision to speak up for Jasmine had been vindicated completely. "Sophia," Jasmine said, turning to the young flight attendant, "thank you for standing up for what was right when it required courage. Effective immediately, you're promoted to senior flight attendant with a salary increase and assignment to Aurora's flagship routes." Sophia burst into tears, overwhelmed by the recognition and reward for doing what she'd been trained to believe was simply her job. Her courage in challenging Hamilton's authority had transformed her career in a single moment. Marcus Rivera stepped forward, understanding that corporate changes were happening in real time. "Ms. Brooks, how do you want us to handle crew procedures for the remainder of the flight, Marcus? You're now the senior purser for this flight," Jasmine replied. "James Mitchell has command of the aircraft. We're going to demonstrate how Aurora flights operate when discrimination is removed from the equation." James Mitchell was in the cockpit, still processing the fact that his captain's discrimination had made him the youngest pilot to command an Aurora transatlantic flight. His decision to finally challenge Hamilton's behavior had saved his career, while Hamilton's defensiveness had ended his. Tower. "This is Aurora, 447. James radioed to air traffic control. "We have a change in command. Captain Mitchell now has control of the aircraft. The official notification would later become part of the federal investigation record, documenting the moment when Hamilton's discrimination cost him not just his job, but his authority to command aircraft." Harold Thompson approached Jasmine with the dignity of someone who had spent decades recognizing real authority when he saw it. "Ma'am, thank you for showing that justice still exists. What you did tonight restored my faith in accountability." Jasmine smiled at Harold with genuine warmth. "Mr. Thompson, your support meant more than you know. Effective immediately, you have lifetime first-class status on Aurora Airlines. Anyone who stands up for justice deserves to be treated with the dignity you showed tonight." Harold's eyes filled with tears as he realized that his decision to challenge Hamilton's discrimination had earned him recognition from someone with the power to change his travel experience forever. Emma Rodriguez was documenting every moment of the justice being delivered, her live stream becoming a real-time case study in how quickly consequences could follow discriminatory behavior when victims had the power to enforce accountability. "You guys, this is incredible," Emma said to her 80,000 viewers. "She's firing people, promoting people, and completely transforming how this airline operates, all because they discriminated against her. This is what accountability looks like when victims have power." Jasmine addressed the entire first-class cabin, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed discrimination into comprehensive reform. "Everyone who witnessed tonight's events has seen exactly why Aurora Airlines needed new leadership. Discrimination has no place in our operations, and tonight's responses demonstrate that we're committed to treating every passenger with dignity." The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt, led by Harold Thompson, and joined by every passenger who had witnessed justice being delivered in real time. Even Emma's live stream audience was flooding the comments with appreciation for what they'd seen. Captain Derek Hamilton walked toward the cockpit to gather his personal belongings, understanding that his airline career was over and his reputation was destroyed. His discrimination had been documented by thousands of people and would become a permanent reminder of the cost of bias in the modern world. As Hamilton passed Jasmine's seat, she spoke quietly to him, words that only he could hear, but would haunt him forever. "Captain Hamilton, You had every opportunity to treat me with basic dignity. You chose prejudice instead. This is what consequences look like. Aurora Flight 447 continued toward London with a completely transformed crew and passenger dynamic. Discrimination had been met with immediate justice. Bias had been replaced with accountability, and the airline industry had just witnessed the most public demonstration of corporate responsibility in aviation history. The flight that began with discrimination was ending with justice, and every person aboard understood that they had witnessed something that would change how airlines treated passengers forever. Aurora Flight 447 continued its journey to London Heathrow with an atmosphere completely transformed from the discrimination and tension that had marked the first hours of the flight. Under Captain James Mitchell's command, and with the airline's owner ensuring that service standards reflected actual respect rather than bias, the cabin crew provided an example of what airline hospitality looked like when every passenger was valued equally. Sophia Martinez moved through the first-class cabin with newfound confidence, her promotion to senior flight attendant validating every instinct she'd had about treating passengers with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. Her service to Jasmine was professional and warm, reflecting genuine respect rather than the nervous uncertainty she'd shown earlier. Miss Brooks Sophia said as she refreshed Jasmine's water, "Thank you for standing up for what's right. I've only been with Aurora for 4 months, but tonight showed me what this company could become under the right leadership." Jasmine smiled at the young woman whose courage had impressed her. "Sophia, you spoke up when it mattered. That kind of integrity is exactly what Aurora needs in our senior crew positions." Marcus Rivera was coordinating cabin service with the efficiency of someone who understood that exceptional customer care meant treating every passenger as valued, rather than sorting them by assumptions about worthiness. His crew was providing consistent professional service that reflected Aurora's stated values, rather than unspoken biases. Emma Rodriguez had finally stopped live streaming after reaching over 100,000 viewers at the peak of the discrimination revelation. Her documentation of the incident had become the most watched real-time civil rights moment of the digital age, and her phone was buzzing with interview requests from major news networks. "I can't believe this happened," Emma said to Jasmine as the cabin settled into the peaceful rhythm of international travel. "Your strength throughout that whole thing was incredible. You never lost your dignity even when they were treating you so badly." "Emma, your documentation was crucial," Jasmine replied. Without witnesses willing to record what happened, discrimination often gets buried in corporate bureaucracy. You made sure this incident couldn't be hidden or minimized. Victoria Shaw was using the quiet flight time to draft legal analysis that she would later publish about the incident's significance for corporate accountability and civil rights enforcement. Her professional network was already discussing the case as a landmark example of how real-time documentation could accelerate justice. Ms. Brooks Victoria said, approaching Jasmine's seat as an attorney, "I have to say that your response tonight was masterful. You demonstrated that corporate accountability can be immediate and comprehensive when leadership takes discrimination seriously." Harold Thompson was enjoying his first experience in first-class service, savoring both the physical comfort and the knowledge that his support for justice had been recognized and rewarded. His lifetime status with Aurora represented validation that standing up for others had value and consequences. Ma'am Harold said to Jasmine, "I've been flying for 40 years, and I've seen a lot of people treated badly by airline crews. Tonight was the first time I've seen real accountability delivered immediately. You've changed how this industry will handle discrimination." James Mitchell's voice came over the intercom, addressing the passengers with the professional calm that had impressed Jasmine enough to promote him to Captain Ladies and Gentlemen. "This is Captain Mitchell. We're cruising at 37,000 feet with smooth conditions ahead. Our estimated arrival time in London remains on schedule." The announcement carried none of the tension that had marked Hamilton's earlier communications. James understood that his promotion came with the responsibility to demonstrate that Aurora's flight operations could be both technically excellent and respectful of every passenger. Preston Blackwood III sat in economy class, his lifetime ban from Aurora, meaning this would be his last flight with the airline. His casual support for Hamilton's discrimination had cost him access to his preferred carrier, and his social media posts celebrating the discrimination were being shared widely as examples of privileged entitlement. The contrast between Preston's situation and Harold's reward illustrated Jasmine's approach to justice. Those who supported discrimination faced consequences, while those who stood up for dignity received recognition. In the galley, Aurora's crew members were discussing how the evening's events would change their approach to passenger service. Sophia's promotion for speaking up against discrimination had sent a clear message that employees would be rewarded for protecting passengers rather than enabling bias. "This is what Aurora should have been all along," Marcus said to Sophia as they prepared meal service. Every passenger treated with respect, crew members supported for doing the right thing, and discrimination met with immediate consequences. The meal service proceeded with efficiency and warmth that reflected genuine hospitality rather than performance. Passengers noticed the difference in crew attitudes, and the cabin atmosphere was more relaxed and comfortable than most international flights. Jasmine worked quietly on her tablet, reviewing the comprehensive reforms she would implement based on the evening's events. Hamilton's discrimination had provided the evidence she needed to justify transforming Aurora's culture, and the positive response from crew and passengers showed that those changes would be welcomed. As Flight 447 continued across the Atlantic, everyone aboard understood that they had participated in something historic. Discrimination had been documented, justice had been delivered, and the airline industry had witnessed a demonstration of accountability that would influence corporate behavior for years to come. The flight that had begun with bias and ended with justice was providing a peaceful conclusion that emphasized dignity, respect, and the possibility of transformation when leaders were committed to equality rather than maintaining systems that enabled discrimination. 7 hours after departure, Aurora Flight 447 was approaching London as a completely different aircraft than the one that had left JFK, carrying passengers who had witnessed that real change was possible when accountability was immediate and comprehensive. By the time Aurora Flight 447 touched down at London Heathrow, the discrimination incident and its dramatic resolution had become a global phenomenon that was reshaping conversations about corporate accountability, airline industry culture, and the power of social media to accelerate justice. Emma Rodriguez's live-stream documentation had been viewed over 300,000 times across multiple platforms, making it the most-watched real-time discrimination incident in social media history. Her Twitter thread documenting the event had been retweeted 50,000 times, and major news outlets were calling her directly for interviews about what she'd witnessed. "BBC wants an interview when we land," Emma told Jasmine as passengers prepared for arrival. CNN, ABC, Sky News. "They all want to talk about what happened. This story is everywhere." The hashtags Aurora447 and Christmas Eve Justice were trending worldwide, with millions of people sharing the story and discussing its implications for corporate responsibility and civil rights enforcement. The incident had transcended airline industry news to become a cultural touchstone for how discrimination should be addressed in the modern era. Victoria Shaw's legal analysis had been shared throughout professional networks with employment attorneys and civil rights organizations, using her documentation as a case study in effective discrimination response. Her LinkedIn post about the incident had reached over 100,000 views and was being cited in legal blogs and academic discussions. "This is going to be studied in law schools and business schools for decades," Victoria explained to her social media followers. Real-time documentation of discrimination met with immediate corporate accountability. It's a perfect case study in how justice can work when victims have power. Harold Thompson's military networks had amplified the story throughout veteran communities, with his Facebook post reaching over 200,000 shares among active duty personnel veterans and military families. His endorsement of Jasmine's response carried particular weight in communities that valued accountability and leadership. The morning news cycles in both America and Europe led with the story framing it as a breakthrough moment for airline industry accountability. Business reporters were analyzing the incident's potential impact on corporate cultures across multiple industries. Aurora Airlines stock is up 12% in pre-market trading, financial analyst Maria Santos reported on CNBC. Investors are responding positively to the new ownership's commitment to eliminating discrimination and improving corporate culture. This incident has actually strengthened market confidence in Aurora's future. Civil rights organizations were hailing the incident as a model for how discrimination should be addressed. The NAACP issued a statement praising Aurora's immediate response and calling on other corporations to follow Jasmine's example of swift, comprehensive accountability. Ms. Brooks demonstrated that corporate leaders can take decisive action against discrimination when they choose to prioritize justice over protecting problematic employees. The statement read, "Her response should become the industry standard for addressing bias in customer service." The airline industry was experiencing immediate ripple effects as other carriers rushed to review their own discrimination policies and crew training programs. Aurora's competitors understood that customers would now expect similar accountability if discrimination occurred on their flights. Delta Airlines announced enhanced bias training for all crew members. United Airlines implemented a new passenger rights reporting system. American Airlines established a dedicated discrimination response team. The industry was transforming its approach to passenger treatment because one incident had demonstrated the cost of maintaining discriminatory cultures. Every airline is scrambling to avoid being the next Aurora Flight 447, aviation industry analyst Robert Chen explained on Bloomberg Television. Ms. Brooks' response created a new standard for accountability that no carrier can ignore. International media coverage was particularly focused on the Christmas Eve timing of the incident and its dramatic resolution. The story resonated with holiday themes of justice, redemption, and the triumph of dignity over prejudice. Christmas Eve, Justice. How one woman's strength transformed an industry. Read the headline in the London Guardian. The story detailed not just the discrimination incident, but Jasmine's background as a tech entrepreneur who had overcome homelessness to build a billion-dollar empire. Employment law experts were analyzing the incident's implications for corporate liability and employee accountability. The documentation created by multiple witnesses had provided a comprehensive record that would influence how discrimination cases were prosecuted and defended. This case demonstrates how modern technology can create incontrovertible evidence of workplace discrimination, explained Georgetown law professor Dr. Sarah Williams. The multiple recording angles and social media documentation have created a new standard for evidence collection in civil rights cases. Hamilton's termination was being discussed in aviation circles as the end of an era when airline crew members could discriminate with minimal consequences. His 23-year career had been destroyed in a matter of hours, creating a cautionary tale that would influence pilot behavior throughout the industry. Captain Hamilton's career ended because he couldn't adapt to modern expectations of equality and respect, explained Airlines Pilots Association representative Michael Torres. Pilots who maintain biases against passengers will find themselves unemployable in today's aviation industry. Preston Blackwood III's lifetime ban from Aurora had become a separate viral story, with social media users celebrating consequences for passengers who supported or encouraged discrimination. His father, Senator Blackwood, was facing calls for comment about his son's behavior and its reflection on his family's values. Corporate culture consultants were using the Aurora incident to advocate for comprehensive bias training and accountability systems across multiple industries. The story had become a business case study in how discrimination could create liability and damage corporate reputation, Ms. Brooks turned her company's discrimination problem into a competitive advantage, explained Harvard Business School professor Dr. James Patterson. By demonstrating zero tolerance for bias, Aurora has positioned itself as the industry leader in inclusive customer service. The Federal Aviation Administration announced that it would be reviewing airline discrimination policies and considering new regulations to ensure passenger rights protection. The incident had created enough political pressure to force regulatory changes throughout the industry. Aurora Airlines was receiving thousands of supportive messages from travelers who wanted to fly with an airline that had demonstrated real commitment to equality. The discrimination incident had paradoxically strengthened Aurora's brand by showing that the company would take decisive action against bias. We're seeing booking increases from customers who want to support a company that stands up for civil rights, Aurora's booking director reported. The incident has actually improved our market position by demonstrating our values in action. The story's global reach was creating international discussions about corporate responsibility and the power of social media to accelerate accountability. What had begun as a single incident of airline discrimination had become a catalyst for broader conversations about equality justice and the role of corporate leadership in promoting civil rights. As media coverage continued expanding, it became clear that Aurora Flight 447 would be remembered not just as an airline incident but as a turning point in how corporations addressed discrimination and how society expected accountability from business leaders. The Christmas Eve discrimination that Captain Hamilton thought he could handle quietly had become a worldwide symbol of justice transformation and the power of standing up for equality when it mattered most. Christmas morning in London dawned crisp and clear as Jasmine Brooks stood in the ancient cemetery of Highgate, placing white roses on a grave that bore the simple inscription, Rosa Brooks, 1932-2007, beloved grandmother. The quiet cemetery was a world away from the viral storm that Aurora Flight 447 had created, but this moment of reflection was exactly what Jasmine needed. "I did it," Grandma Jasmine whispered, touching the weathered headstone. "I kept the promise I made on that bus 29 years ago. No one will ever be forced to move again, not on my planes, not on my watch." The irony wasn't lost on her that Hamilton's discrimination had occurred on December 24th, the exact anniversary of the Greyhound bus incident that had shaped her entire life's mission. Rosa Brooks's humiliation had led to her granddaughter's determination to acquire power that could protect others from similar indignities. Jasmine's phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, congratulations from business leaders, and updates about the continuing viral spread of the Aurora 447 story. But in this quiet moment with her grandmother's memory, she understood that the real victory wasn't the media attention or the corporate justice. The real victory was that discrimination had been met with immediate, comprehensive accountability. Sophia Martinez was spending Christmas morning with her family in London, sharing the story of how speaking up for a passenger had transformed her career in a single evening. Her promotion to senior flight attendant represented more than professional advancement. It validated every instinct she'd had about treating people with dignity. Mama Sophia said to her mother as they prepared Christmas breakfast, "I learned something important last night. Sometimes doing the right thing is scary, but it's always worth it. Standing up for that woman changed my whole life." Sophia's courage had been rewarded with career advancement, but more importantly, she'd learned that airlines could operate with integrity when leadership prioritized equality over enabling discrimination. Harold Thompson was enjoying Christmas dinner with his daughter's family, sharing the story of how his support for justice had earned him lifetime first-class status with Aurora Airlines. But the real gift was knowing that his military values of protecting others had mattered in a civilian context. Granddad, his 7-year-old grandson, asked why was the captain being mean to the lady. Harold considered his answer carefully. Sometimes people make assumptions about others based on how they look instead of who they really are. The important thing is to stand up for people when they're being treated unfairly, just like we did on the plane. The lesson would stay with the child forever that ordinary people had the power and responsibility to challenge injustice when they encountered it. Emma Rodriguez was fielding interview requests from international media outlets, her documentation of the Aurora 447 incident having launched her journalism career before she'd even graduated from college. Major news networks were offering her positions based on her real-time coverage of the discrimination and its resolution. "This is incredible," Emma told her parents as they watched BBC News feature her live stream footage. "Standing up for someone who was being treated badly changed my entire future." Emma's instinct to document injustice had created a permanent record that would influence corporate behavior for decades. Her citizen journalism had demonstrated the power of individual witnesses to create accountability. Victoria Shaw was spending Christmas morning drafting legal analysis that would later be published in Harvard Law Review about the Aurora incident's significance for civil rights enforcement. Her documentation had helped create legal precedent for how discrimination should be addressed in the social media age. "This case is going to influence employment law for generations," Victoria explained to her husband. "Real-time accountability for discrimination, comprehensive corporate response, and immediate consequences for bias. It's a perfect storm for justice." James Mitchell was spending his first Christmas as an Aurora Airlines captain, understanding that his promotion came with the responsibility to demonstrate that airline operations could be both excellent and respectful. His decision to finally challenge Hamilton's behavior had saved his career and positioned him to lead Aurora's transformation. Preston Blackwood III was spending Christmas dealing with the consequences of his support for discrimination. His lifetime ban from Aurora had become a viral story of entitled privilege meeting accountability, and his father was facing political pressure about his son's behavior. Captain Derek Hamilton was spending Christmas morning in his Connecticut home, understanding that his airline career was over and his reputation was permanently destroyed. 23 years of service had been erased by a few hours of discrimination that had been documented by thousands of people. His pension was under review due to Aurora's morality clauses. His pilot's license was being investigated by federal aviation authorities. His behavior had become a cautionary tale that would influence airline training programs for decades. Aurora Airlines was experiencing a surge of support from travelers who wanted to fly with a company that had demonstrated real commitment to equality. The discrimination incident had strengthened Aurora's market position by showing that the company would take decisive action against bias. The Federal Aviation Administration was implementing new regulations requiring comprehensive discrimination reporting and response protocols throughout the airline industry. Aurora Flight 447 had created enough political pressure to force regulatory changes that would protect passengers on every carrier. As Christmas 2024 concluded, the story of Aurora Flight 447 had become more than a viral moment. It had become a turning point in how corporations addressed discrimination, how society expected accountability from business leaders, and how individuals could create change by standing up for justice. Jasmine Brooks had transformed her grandmother's humiliation into a legacy of protection for others. The little girl who had been forced to the back of the bus had grown up to own the airline, and her response to discrimination would influence corporate behavior for generations. The Christmas Eve discrimination that Captain Hamilton thought he could handle quietly had become a worldwide demonstration that accountability was possible, justice could be immediate, and the power to create change belonged to anyone with the courage to demand dignity for all. If this story of Christmas Eve justice moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about standing up for what's right, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you least expect. Remember, treat everyone with dignity and respect, because you never know who might be watching. That person you're judging might own the building you're standing in, sign the check you're waiting for, or have the power to change your life with a single decision. Until next time, keep fighting for justice. Keep standing up for others, and never forget that real power comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.